and welcome back to Engage with Eagle Forum. I am Kirsten Hasler, the Washington, D.C. Executive Director of Eagle Forum. Today, I am joined on the mic by my friend and Eagle Forum board member, Glyn McKay. Today's episode is the final in our two-part series on the coronavirus. We hope that you enjoyed Part 1's discussion with Georgia's U.S. Representative Jody Hice. Congressman Hice imparted insight into what is actually happening in Washington, D.C. in response to the pandemic.
As we continue the discussion on the economic impact of COVID-19, I am personally thrilled to welcome to this episode my colleague and friend, Scott Parkinson. Scott has worked in politics for over 13 years. He worked in the United States Senate for 3 different senators and then served as the executive director of the Republican Study Committee, one of the largest caucuses in the House of Representatives. He then became chief of staff to former Representative Ron DeSantis and then served on the transition team as Congressman DeSantis became Governor DeSantis in Florida. Scott is currently the Vice President of Government Affairs at the Club for Growth and lives in Arlington, Virginia with his wife and 3 girls. Scott, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Scott, you have followed this pandemic and the federal government's response closely. We think you would agree with us that the greatest threat to Americans isn't the virus itself, but the economic impact of the government-guided shutdown of everything from schools to churches and small businesses. The market has tanked and unemployment has skyrocketed. Most Americans are watching for their stimulus checks, but have no idea what else was in those packages passed by Congress. Can you give us an overview of the stimulus bills that have come out of Congress and what they mean?
Sure. So I think if you wind back the clock, there have been 3.5 different legislative responses to the coronavirus pandemic. The first one was relatively small, even though it sounds large. It was $8 billion that went directly toward health care workers and direct services to try to develop a vaccination and sort of prepare with the Centers for Disease Control. And that was legislation that overwhelmingly passed Congress. Then we had phase 2, and phase 2 included a very, very large burden for small business owners. It included a paid leave mandate requiring at least 80 hours of paid leave for employers. And they basically said, oh, there's going to be this system through the U.S. Treasury Department so that, capital can be advanced to small businesses, and this doesn't really turn into a job-destroying mandate. But I think as we've gone through the process over the last 6 weeks, and each week on Thursday morning as we learn the new jobless claims numbers, that we've really learned that this paid leave mandate is destroying small business and job creators because it was really developed by people that are good at looking at financial portfolios, but folks that really haven't signed the front of a paycheck as a job creator. And we've seen, as of last Thursday, over 26 million Americans losing their jobs. And I think that number has a strong possibility this week to exceed 30 million. So we're just right in the middle of this pandemic and what the economic response will look like. There have been, as I mentioned, these different phases that Congress has taken in order to address the economic crisis. But really, when you're just throwing money at a problem without a pro-growth solution, it doesn't do anything except for put a Band-Aid on the issue. And right now we need a vaccination and we need therapeutics. We don't need Band-Aids. So I think that even though Congress has thrown, let's see, the total here is actually coming pretty close to $3 trillion. There was $2.2 trillion through phase 3 in the CARES Act. Then phase 3.5 included another $500 billion, $310 billion of which went to the Paycheck Protection Program that was depleted in its first tranche of $350 billion in only 13 days. Wow. So really, there are people that are clamoring for what they sort of view as free money. We've even seen the Los Angeles Lakers take a Paycheck Protection Program loan and announce that they were returning that money because they didn't realize that the money was going to run out so fast. the Lakers are one of the biggest brands in the entire world, and that organization is worth over $4 billion. So it's really an issue here when Treasury hasn't discerned between those that really need capital in order to continue to operate and those that are large organizations, whether it's Potbellies or the Los Angeles Lakers.
So just to be clear, that pot of money was available, what you're saying, from everybody from the Los Angeles Lakers to the gift shop down the street, right? Any small business was going after those dollars.
Yeah, and I think that they tried to define a small business as 500 employees or less.
Okay.
Obviously, those are large and medium-sized businesses that aren't in the corporate structure. And, the $500 billion for distressed industries, that's really what the corporate money, those guaranteed loans were. And so you saw money for the cargo industry and airlines, and even Boeing had a special line item, I think, of $17 billion to help them because they were viewed as an essential to national security type business. And so really when it looks at the eligibility for these various, I guess I would just call them extensions of capital, Treasury had a ton of control to determine how to allocate the money. And they did ultimately pick winners and losers. I think that there's hundreds of anecdotes throughout the country of small businesses that applied for the loan through their bank, and the bank says, sorry, we lost your loan, or it was delayed in getting submitted. And, I've got direct family that didn't receive the loan in both Florida and in Pennsylvania. And I'm sure that this is, not just exclusive to my family, right? This is every single one of your neighbors probably knows a small business owner that was denied in the first tranche. So you've got that $310 billion that was passed last week for phase 3.5 in additional funding for the Paycheck Protection Program. The system did crash this week when they tried to reopen it. So my biggest concern here is that that money is going to be gone in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And what's Congress going to do when they return? They're just going to throw more money at the problem.
So in all of these phases and what's to come, are there any wins for small business owners or conservatives?
I think that small business owners that received the Paycheck Protection Program are viewing that as a win because the rates associated with those loans they're winners, and they are helping some of those businesses stay open. But the problem is it didn't really discern between those that were distressed small businesses and those that were already going to be fine and had employees showing up, right? If you're a local shop on Main Street and you're a bookstore, right, and nobody's coming through to buy books, you needed a Paycheck Protection Program so you don't have to close your shop and you can make your monthly payments. But if you're sort of one of these essential small businesses that's had the ability to remain open and you're not seeing the cash flow issues and you're still paying your employees, a lot of them just saw it as free money. And I can understand why it's a business decision to apply for that money. And that's why I think you're seeing a lot of people that are pretty satisfied with the program, but an overwhelmingly number of folks that just did not have access to it because of how fast it ran out. So I would just look for folks to move forward with that. This is sort of a conservative's nightmare when it comes to big government saying we're here to help during a national pandemic. And there are a number of items in phase 2 and phase 3 that I think are incredibly concerning. They created this big perverse incentive with the unemployment insurance benefit. So right now, states determine what the maximum benefit is for their own state unemployment insurance program. And Congress said, we're going to allow every person that's unemployed to receive an additional $600 on top of their state's maximum benefit. And so for many employees, they're actually making more money unemployed than they would if they went back to work. I think that's why you're seeing stories of disgruntled workers that were not laid off their employer received a Paycheck Protection Program loan in order to continue to stay in business. And, folks were pissed off because they didn't get a chance to kind of go and have a staycation, and, their kids are out of school, but they've still got to show up for work. So I can understand why they're a little unhappy here. But the biggest issue here is that the unemployment insurance program benefit that the federal government came in and came to the rescue with was totally flawed. And you cannot pay people more to sit on the sidelines and not work than to be productive toward the economy and, be a part of a business. So, as you measure the macroeconomic effects of a healthy economy, one of the main drivers is productivity. And right now, productivity throughout the country is really low, especially when you're looking at various industries that are not deemed essential, right? And then you're seeing, folks that'll have to cut wages. When wages are decreasing, that's also a big macroeconomic effect of an economy that's going to fall into a depression. So as I look at the job numbers that are coming out every week, as I look at the data that the Labor Department puts out, I obviously have concerns about the depth of the recession. And that's why I think that we need to be focused on pro-growth reforms that can speed along the economic recovery without having a major deficit impact.
Yeah, for sure. Right now, so we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to share the story of one of Eagle Forum's state leaders who has been affected by the virus. Cindy Honcoop and her husband have owned and operated a construction business in Washington state for over 40 years. Cindy's husband tested positive for COVID in March, and while she was sick for a day, she was never tested because of ration testing. They have both fully recovered, but it's unclear whether their business will survive. As a result of the government restrictions, they had to release almost all of their employees and lost most of the work they had lined up for the rest of the year. Construction was not deemed essential by their governor unless it was a government project or ag-related. They were forced to release 60% of their longtime faithful employees after the stay-at-home order was enacted, and now they are down employees by 90%.
And this goes exactly to the point that you were making, Scott. I was talking to Cindy earlier this week and asked her about the loans, the small business loans. And she said there were just strings attached that didn't work for them. But regardless, it appears that in their area, the larger companies got the bulk of the funds and little to none was left for the mom and pop businesses. And like you said earlier, we know there are thousands of stories like the Honcoops. It seems that while the government at all levels was trying to protect Americans, instead they've killed business and stifled the economy. So continue that discussion. In your opinion, what is the proper role of government in a crisis like the one that we have faced?
Well, this has been difficult, right? Because you've had governors issue stay-at-home orders. They've, shut down schools. They've shut down business. They've shut down government, right? So many people are teleworking and homeschooling and just trying to figure out how to live a normal life. But the data that's out there, I think that there are a lot of small businesses that receive the Paycheck Protection assistance. It just didn't go far enough, and it didn't really give the trade-offs between those that needed it right away and those that probably could float for a few months. So that's why I think the money just ran out so fast. In the situation here of Cindy and her husband, obviously we're thankful that they've recovered from this sickness, right? Obviously, you don't want the cure to be worse than the disease. The disease is awful.
Yes.
There are people that are dying from it. And, I think that a lot of young people like us are concerned not about our own health or our kids' health, but getting our parents or our grandparents sick, right?
Yeah.
And obviously there's really heart-wrenching stories throughout the country of that happening. So what's the main role of government in this kind of a situation? Number one, I think that there's totally an appropriate role for the government in stepping in and trying to work with private industry to develop a cure, a vaccine, a therapeutic, ways to make sure that the people are protected, right? Number two, since the government has stepped in here and essentially said to people, you cannot go out, you have to social distance, you can't go to the bars, you can't go to restaurants. this is sort of like a taking, right? They are taking from the people by mandating that you stay home unless you're doing an essential activity. So I think that there probably was the role of the federal government to come with this assistance. I just think that the Paycheck Protection Program and then also the $500 billion for distressed industry was totally flawed from the outset in the way that they were going to be distributing the money. And let's be honest, this is our money. These are taxpayer funds that are adding to our deficit, that are exploding the national debt. And, eventually the bill's going to come due. And I think folks are trying to decide if we're just going to tell China that all the money we owe them from buying our debt is going to go away because, hey, they started the China virus, the Wuhan virus, or is it going to be something where we just continue to print money? And so the federal government obviously has a role in terms of allocating federal funding when it's been approved. So I think that that's okay, but I just don't think that the fashion on which it's been done has been pro-growth or conservative.
Yeah, the proper role of government is certainly a question that everyone needs to be considering right now. Scott, a few days ago, you tweeted a video of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or affectionately called AOC by many of her followers. On a side note, you can and should follow Scott on Twitter at Scott T. Parkinson. But she said in her tweet, or in the video that you tweeted, quote, "When we have this discussion about going back or reopening, I think a lot of people should say no. We are not going back to working 70 hours a week to just put food on the table and not even feel any sort of security in our lives." End quote. What exactly is she saying?
Well, listen, she's playing to this out of control socialist base that doesn't want to work, that wants to depend on free money from government, free benefits from government. They obviously have articulated that they want a quote unquote living wage for workers. But I think if you ask those 26 million people that are unemployed right now, if they would like to work to put food on the table, they would tell you overwhelmingly yes. There are right now millions of people that are at the kitchen table, and they're trying to figure out exactly how they're going to put food there. They're trying to figure out how they're going to make sure that their kids don't have to skip meals. And, you've got Nancy Pelosi, on the other hand, bragging about how much she loves ice cream. And I think it's just so out of touch how far the left has gone. And they just do not understand what exactly it means to be struggling in the era of an economic crisis. The other thing is, we heard earlier this week that the House of Representatives decided to cancel their session for the week of May 4th, but the Senate does plan to convene underneath the leadership of Mitch McConnell. And I think obviously he's got this appetite to continue to confirm judges, right? They're not going to be passing any major legislative response next week to the coronavirus. But the House did cancel their session. And when we look at the House and Senate, obviously our government, our federal government, is essential, right? It's essential to protect the constitutional rights of the people. And right now, a lot of those rights are being infringed upon. I think that you're also seeing the Attorney General really taking a look at overreach within the states that are violating the people's rights. So as Congress is essential, let's keep in mind that these Democrats, they want that blue collar vote, right? This is also a vote that Donald Trump did pretty well with in 2016, the blue collar workers in the Rust Belt. But the Democrats are targeting people in Pennsylvania and Michigan, and they're looking at folks in Wisconsin, and they're basically telling them, we need you to continue to work. We need you to be the delivery driver of the truck. We need you to be the frontline workers in our hospitals. We need you to continue to do these things during the era of coronavirus. But we're concerned about our own health. We're concerned about our own ability to convene as a body. And, the reports out of the Democratic caucus's call from yesterday, they're mind-boggling to me, that you've got all these members that really do want things to continue. They want Amazon drivers to give them ice cream and all this other crap, but they're not willing to show up and actually do their main duty of voting in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's also this discussion of, we should allow members to do proxy voting and vote from their districts. That is not a good solution, because it gives even more power to the leadership who live here in Washington. They're not even going back to their district.
Right.
And that goes to both sides. I think that, we've seen recently during the so-called recess, our own leadership broadcasting videos from Washington. So let's just face it what it is. And I think that Congress is essential. They just need to take one flight. They should take a one-way ticket back here. They should get back to work. We should be developing pro-growth opportunities for the American economy, and really reevaluating the exposure that we have to China when it comes to the production of pharmaceuticals and of essential medical supplies like these, masks and ventilators and gowns and so forth.
Right. So when we're talking about actual solutions and recovery, the Club for Growth recently launched the Cut Red Tape Coalition that calls on Congress and the Trump administration to take bold steps to simplify regulation and reduce barriers on this innovation that we're talking about, so that our economy can recover and hopefully flourish again. So tell us more about this effort.
Everybody knows that the Trump economy was successful for really two main reasons. Number one, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from December 2017 really drove productivity and growth in America through reductions of taxation, especially the corporate rate cut and this temporary provision of allowing for full expensing of capital expenditures. When you think about the other pillar, it is Trump's deregulatory agenda. He's always bragged about the number of regulations that he's repealed or abolished in exchange for any new promulgation of a regulation. And I think that the ratio is about 8-1. And so the deregulatory agenda, rolling back these major regulatory rules from the Obama era, really accommodated the lowest unemployment that we've seen in generations. We finally saw what I think you can call pretty good data on quarterly growth in GDP. We're obviously exceeding the growth that we had seen from the Obama administration. And initially, the Democrats wanted to say, that's only because of the things that we did for the last 8 years. That's finally catching up, right? But really, it was direct action that Congress took with the president in passing tax cuts, and then also, reducing the regulatory burden on job creators. So as we think about pro-growth ideas going forward, Club for Growth joined with 7 other organizations, and we launched this Cut Red Tape Coalition. The Cut Red Tape Coalition currently consists of leaders from Freedom Works, Heritage Action, Americans for Prosperity, Tea Party Patriots, the Job Creators Network, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and we're also going to be inviting a lot of other groups to join. I think if anybody's listening now and they want to be a part of advocating for reducing red tape and finding pro-growth ideas that we can get in the next legislative response in Congress, you're certainly encouraged to check in with us at cutredtapecoalition.com. I think you've seen a number of groups really put out exceptional information on steps that are being taken right now at the state, local, and federal level. Americans for Tax Reform is leading the way with that. They've already identified almost 400 regulations that have been relaxed, modified, or waived during the coronavirus. And I think that is indicative of the fact that we're totally over-regulated now. These are regulations that are standing in the way of job creators. They're driving out competition, and they're slowing economic growth and productivity. We're not talking about having dirty air. We're not talking about drinking brown water. right? Everybody wants to have clean air and clean water, right? And there's appropriate regulation for those sorts of things. But, there's regulations related to healthcare services through telehealth. There's regulations related to speeding up the process that the Federal Drug Administration has as they consider the approval of medications. There's all sorts of things that are even related to the economic crisis that we're suffering through the coronavirus pandemic that we can relax and that we can temporarily get rid of for now. And if we ever decide to bring them back, there better be a damn good justification for doing so.
Right.
So the Cut Red Tape Coalition, we're going to be building a lot of momentum here in the coming days and weeks. Marsha Blackburn is leading an effort in the United States Senate. She's a senator from Tennessee. And this letter says, hey, we need to use a legislative response here to cut red tape in order to speed along the economic recovery. And Congressman Steve Shabbat from Ohio, he's the ranking member on the Small Business Committee. He's leading the House letter. So we're strongly encouraging folks to check that out that are in Capitol Hill offices that might be listening. Or obviously, if you want to call your member of Congress, we're doing a phone to action effort through these groups and really just calling on members to decrease the regulatory burden on job creators so that we can get Americans back to work, reopen the economy, and be stronger than ever before.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out, too, that this isn't just a Republican or conservative issue. This is an American issue. And the club's polling actually shows that the American people across every party support deregulation, maybe not all for the same reason, but for one reason or another. Isn't that right?
It is. So we tested a couple of things in some polling earlier this month. And the resounding answer from respondents was, number one, they do think that they're being overregulated. And number two, they think that it's smart to waive regulations in order to accommodate an economic recovery. This isn't just Republicans, right? Obviously, as you're surveying voters, some people I think are a little sensitive to regulation in terms of being a job creator. Other people are sensitive to regulation in terms of having a healthy environment, right? Mm-hmm. But as we do our scientific polling through WPA Intelligence, who's the contracted pollster for this one, it really showed across party lines and even with independents that there is very, very strong approval of deregulating the economy so that we can get job creators the necessary capital, the necessary paperwork needs to just be abolished, right? Why are we filling out hundreds of pages of paperwork when we should be focusing on, getting people back into the workforce? Yeah. So we feel good about the polling. We've obviously shared that with folks in the administration. It's public. And I think that's why this momentum and the appetite to really cut red tape is growing. And I think that it stands a pretty good chance for us to get long-term reforms that are only going to help when we think about an economic recovery in the coming months.
Very good.
Yeah, I'm hoping that's one of the long-term impacts of this coronavirus is something positive. On that note, how do you think this effort to get America back to work will play into the 2020 elections?
Wow, that's a loaded question, right?
Go ahead and give us your predictions too, Scott.
Yeah. So first of all, I think that there are a lot of voters that are really starting to get concerned about the depth of the economic recession and the likelihood of a depression. Mm-hmm. I think that as you see, 4 to 5 to 6 million people every week losing their job, that more folks are recognizing the economic consequence of stay-at-home orders and social distancing. So we think that there needs to be a return to economic normalcy. We obviously want people to be safe. And as I talk to members of Congress, I say, just be prepared for the second wave in October, make sure you have enough testing, make sure that whatever happens at that point, that we don't go into really a strong double dip where the recovery will take, a decade. But, I think that Congress, the House and the Senate, both of those are up for grabs, right? I think that the Democrats could win the Senate back. There are, even before the coronavirus, there are numerous seats in play for the Democrats. They've done a good job recruiting a couple of candidates in key states. And there's only a couple of pickup opportunities for Republicans with Alabama, and then a really, really outside chance with Michigan. But the way that coronavirus weighs heavy on voters' minds when it comes to next November, well, right now we're still roughly 7 months away, and we all know that every presidential election of my lifetime and every balance of the House and Senate really ends up getting flipped between September and voting day and election day. And I think as we look at what the consequence is of the pandemic, that President Trump has got a real opportunity to talk about why he took this serious during what I think will be 3 presidential debates with Joe Biden. I think that it is basically a choice between 2 people when it comes for the presidency. And Vice President Biden, there are real vulnerabilities with his own campaign right now, even just stepping back and not putting on a partisan hat. I think the people, even in his own party, have second thoughts about him being the nominee. There's, sort of buyer's remorse. And Club for Growth obviously issued a poll showing that Andrew Cuomo was a preferred candidate over Joe Biden. Obviously, that's a real long shot for Biden to be taken off the ticket, even though he hasn't been formally nominated. I think that he will be. So it'll be Biden against Trump. What do Trump's coattails look like for congressional candidates? There's probably about 70 House seats that are in play for either side. And obviously, Club for Growth, PAC, has made about 20 endorsements so far. And I would expect us to make a few more, and then we'll use our Super PAC Club for Growth action to weigh in and support certain candidates' campaigns. But it's going to be tight. That's the bottom line. And we know that the House right now, the Democrats have a pretty strong majority. Before coronavirus, I think it would have been very difficult to win back the House, but I think that Republicans will net seats. And then in the Senate, I think that it is a total toss-up because of these races in Arizona and Colorado and Maine and Iowa and North Carolina. Those are going to be really tight races. They're expensive. And, the president's popularity in some of those states is wavering. So we'll be watching real closely and seeing where we can make a difference. But obviously, one of our organization's main priorities is electing those that believe in economic freedom and liberty, and will actually vote that way when they get to Congress. So I think that you'll see a number of really, really solid candidates get elected that we've endorsed. And I'm excited about what that means in terms of policy being effectuated and, just this ideal of freedom coming back to the forefront. Because right now, our freedoms are being infringed upon. They're telling us what we can do and what we can't do. We obviously want to be safe. We want to protect each other. But at some point, like Donald Trump says, the cure cannot be worse than the disease.
Yeah. So if you're interested in those pro-growth candidates that the Club for Growth has identified worthy of support, you can see a list of those at Club for Growth, FOR, clubforgrowth.org. Eagle Forum has a PAC as well, and you can see the list of those candidates that Eagle Forum has deemed as worthy of support at eagleforum.org. And I think that you'll find that many of those candidates align. So, Scott, thank you so much for being with us today. To end on a lighter note, I have one more question for you. I recently heard you've really embraced being a girl dad, and you know every word to every song on Frozen. So what's your favorite Frozen song?
From the first one or the second one?
Oh, geez.
Overall.
Overall.
Oh, man. I really liked Fixer Upper from the first one.
That's a cute song. My husband is really into the Woods. He's like, that song is totally for the dads. It's like a throwback kind of Journey sounding. And if you see the music video, they have like Queen moments in it. It's funny.
Yeah, Weezer did the song too.
Yes, and they did
awesome.
a music video, which is really weird. But anyways.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And again, follow Scott on Twitter at Scott T. Parkinson. And you can get more information on the Club for Growth at clubforgrowth.org. And we also encourage you to go to eagleforum.org for more information on these issues as well. As we touched on in our discussion with Scott, following a season of record-breaking employment, the unemployment numbers have skyrocketed to unprecedented levels following all of the stay-at-home orders from federal, state, and local government. We're now at 3.8 million jobless claims in the U.S. In response, there's been a growing movement to reopen businesses and to challenge those state-issued guidelines concerning coronavirus. So with us now is Eagle Forum of Alabama's Executive Director, Becky Gerritson. You may remember Becky from before. She's no stranger to the podcast, and we encourage you to go back and listen to episode 11, where she talks about the government intimidation that she faced as a conservative activist and how that gave way to where she is now. So Becky, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always great to be with you guys.
Tell us, what have you been doing with your Reopen Alabama efforts, and how have you seen success at this point?
Well, we've done a couple of things. First of all, a few weeks ago, our Lieutenant Governor came out with the recommendations that were given by our task force to reopen Alabama. And for the most part, they were very good, and it would allow retail, restaurants, daycares, and close contact businesses to begin reopening. Of course, they're all with very strict protocols and ways to keep their customers safe and their employees safe. So we put out a press release and wrote articles in support of that. And we even held a car rally in support about 5 days later. And it was a rally of support so that the governor would sign off on these. Now, I'd like to get back to this later. The rally turned into something quite different, but those were the first two things. We have our legislative team is working with legislators to draft a bill that will protect businesses from lawsuits over the coronavirus. We think that small businesses really need to be protected right now, and also this may include churches as well. So we're busy making sure the things we want in that bill are added into that. And then I've been talking with a lot of small business people and independent contractors and trying to support them. We're now at the point where many of them are ready to defy the government orders. Here in Alabama, we're still technically not really open. They have opened some retail, but all of the salons and all these other businesses are not open yet. So just trying to help in that way.
Becky, you posted a picture on Facebook of the Gaston Flag coiled rattlesnake with the phrase, "Don't let the mask become a muzzle." For background, if you're not familiar, the Gaston Flag was popular during the American Revolution, and it says, "Don't tread on me." The flag has been used as a symbol of American patriotism and resistance to government when it imposes a burden on civil liberties. So, Becky, what exactly do you think "Don't let the mask become a muzzle" means?
Well, a couple of things about that flag that are so neat is the rattlesnake was used because it was really only found in America. They didn't have that in Europe.
Yeah.
That was one of the first things. And then it has really sharp eyes. And so it's vigilant. It kind of represents vigilance. And then rattlesnakes never begin an attack. They only attack once they're treaded upon. So it's something like they don't surrender. Once you attack them, then they will come back at you.
Yeah.
And so it's really a sign of courage.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something else I didn't realize about it, but the number of rattles on the flag were the number of colonies at the time. I didn't realize the rattles had that symbol, but anyway,
That's cool.
We brought that flag out again when we started the Tea Party back in 2009. just basically saying, don't tread on our liberties. We will strike back. We are Americans. We have the right to these freedoms that were fought for. And I feel like this virus has been used as a way to shut us up. So let me go back to the car rally that we had last week. It was a car rally in support of these recommendations. So people from all over the state, we started a website, we had a Facebook page, we had people contacting us from all over the state, and we were just going to be driving around our Capitol and, with our flags and just in support of these recommendations. And then we were going to have a microphone set up on the Capitol steps with people who wanted to go park their cars and come out and talk about why they wanted the governor to pass, to approve these recommendations, how it has affected them, how this virus has affected them. So, and we were going to use all the social distancing and all of this. And so the police reached out to us and we met with 3 different departments the day before, and it went great. These were guys that I've worked with before. Everything was good. They said, we don't want to have any problems. We don't want this to look bad on us. We don't want it to look bad on you. We just want to make sure everybody's safe. And we reassured them that it was a car rally so people could stay in their cars and not, compromise any public health. Well, the next morning we get there to start the rally and all of the roads were blocked off.
Oh, wow.
And our route had been on the website. So people knew where to go. Well, a lot of people don't live in Montgomery that were coming. So once these roads were blocked off, they didn't know where to go.
Yeah.
So this rally actually kind of turned into a protest of the government shutting the streets down. Now, the guys I had met with the day before that said everything was great, when I talked to them the next morning, I'm like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And they said, Becky, we don't know. They said, when this happened above our heads, everything was fine. There's no reason for this. We don't understand why they're doing this. And the excuse, they said, the uppity ups who made this decision said they blocked the streets because of construction. But the roads they blocked off were brand new paved, had no construction or anything. So that muzzle on that rattlesnake, that mask right now is used to stop our liberties of even just driving our car around the Capitol. They saw that as such a threat that they shut the roads down. And this is just a tiny thing of what's happening across the country.
Mm-hmm. And you would agree, I don't think the people at the top, the people in the government, they're not inherently evil. We're not saying that. It's just this idea that maybe we don't know as much as they do. And so they need to make sure they're protecting us. And really, that's not what the American dream, being an American, our, liberty is about.
Right.
It's just really frustrating.
Self-government. We don't need the government to tell us what to do.
Right. Right. It reminds me though of my children all the time. I'm like, why are you making this a deal? Like I told you to do one thing. Why are you, refusing to do that? And then you make it a big deal. Sometimes I want to say that to government. Anyway, I digress. So what do you say to these people that claim advocating for reopening the economy is only a Republican issue? You're only worried about the money.
Well, that's a great question. And the polling does show that when you poll Democrats and Republicans, the Democrats are way more scared of the virus and the people, the health of people and keeping them safe. Republicans are more on we need to open the economy. But I think what Democrats especially need to realize is that you cannot have freedoms like we have. You cannot have the best healthcare system in the world. You cannot have good schools. You cannot have a welfare system that helps those who really need help if you don't have a strong economy.
Right.
And I think Republicans, on the other hand, realize that a good economy is what helps people be actually healthy
Right.
and allows them to have good health. So I think it's just a misperception maybe on their part, but the two really do go. You have to have a good economy to be able to provide these things for your citizens.
Right.
And, you can't watch TV right now without seeing a number of commercials with stay-at-home public service announcements or PSAs. It just seems to really drive this fear. So how do you think that we should balance the real threats of the coronavirus with reviving the economy and the social practices of many Americans?
That's a great question. The number one thing I think we need to realize right off the bat is we need to acknowledge the amount of irrational fear that is driving policy right now. Instead of talking about all the deaths, we need to be saying that more than 99% of the people that get this virus are going to get over it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 1% or less that are actually going to die from this. But yet it has just turned into a god for us. We have dropped every other issue that our country cared about, our liberties, our going to the doctor, our family relationships, our church. We've thrown it all away, and we've fallen on our knees to worship this virus. And I think that we need to acknowledge each person needs to think about, run through the scenario. If I get this disease, you know what? 99% chance I'm going to get over it. It's not going to be that bad. But I think the narrative that's being driven right now is it's full of fear. So first of all, acknowledge the fear. The second thing is you can have a balance. You can look at the data and science on about the illness, but then you also need to look at the loss of life that's going to happen at the other end of an economic shutdown, the number of suicides, the mental illness, the physical abuse. Gosh, there's just so much, the spiritual health, the social health, other health issues. All these people are putting off things that they need to go to the doctor for, which are probably getting worse and worse while they're staying at home. All of these things need to be considered as well. Yeah. So I think we can easily find a balance between them. But what we need to look to is common sense. Let common sense be our driver. This is what we use every day throughout our lives to manage how we live. And our circumstances are always changing, but we go back to common sense. What makes sense for my life? What makes sense for our community? And let that help drive our policy, because what we're doing really doesn't have a lot of common sense.
Yeah. So if our listeners want to help get America back to work, where do you suggest they look? What are some ideas of things that they can do?
Well, a couple of things that I've been doing. And first, looking at common sense. Just step back from everything and kind of shut yourself in and say, what makes sense? What makes sense for your family? For people right now that have a business that's been shut down, if I had a business right now that was shut down and I was a hairdresser, let's say, I would defy the orders because I would have to feed my family. And that's what God tells me to do. God says, provide for your families. This is a good thing. This is what we're supposed to do. Who is government to come along and say that I am not allowed to do that? So if I had a business, I would take the risk because I need food on my table. So look to common sense. I am also reviewing American history. How did our founding fathers, push back against what was coming against them? They were going against the world's largest empire, but they wanted their freedom and they wanted their God-given rights. And these are our God-given rights that we're talking about. So looking there, I also think contacting your city council members and your county commission. Our county commission wrote a letter to the governor and said, we are ready to open up. Our citizens are responsible. We've done a great job. Our hospital is capable of taking these patients. And now it's time to open up. And that kind of happens at the local level. And then flood your state legislators' phones and emails and let them know how you feel, because they're going to be the decision makers. They're going to have the most influence over the governor in your state. And so you really need to just speak up. We cannot be quiet right now.
And find your local Eagle Forum chapter too. They can help you out.
Yes, that is great. Definitely.
So what do you think some of the positive outcomes of this movement will be?
My biggest hope is that this drives us back to the Lord. We are still a Christian country. I know some people say we're post-Christian, but no, when you look at the whole of America, we still are very Christian. Many people aren't living that way. They haven't sold out their lives to the Lord, but I think this is making people reevaluate. So that's number one. I think cultivating the family, which is what Eagle Forum is all about. I'm hoping by having our kids back at home and not in schools, and we don't have a million things taking our time away in the evenings, going here and there and running from soccer practice to basketball and all of that. I'm hoping that parents and families begin to really love their families and want to have changes. When we go back to normal, I hope they'll pull back into their families. Those are two of the biggest things. And then I hope that Americans will stand up against an oppressive government.
Yeah.
We so need that.
Well, and just returning to these founding principles, this idea of what liberty really means. We talked a bit ago with Scott about AOC, kind of the leader of the progressive left right now, and how she's saying we should even question going back to work. No, it's not only not what being an American is about, but it's not what being a human is about. I'm sure somebody could say that much more articulately than me, but
how can you sustain that? How
Right.
can everyone just stay home? Don't they realize you have to have an economy? You have to have money coming in?
and I wonder if it's a disconnect. I saw a young girl that I grew up with posting yesterday about, hey, sign this petition to forgive student loans. And in the comments, she said, I was lucky enough to not have student loans, but I'm signing this for my friends. And someone responded and said, well, who's going to pay for it? And she said, well, like I said, I don't have student loans. I'm just signing this for my friends. And he said, and this is one of her peers, somebody's got to pay for this. Somebody has got to pay the lenders back. And who will that be? The taxpayers.
She that didn't have the loan. Right.
Exactly. So I feel like there's a disconnect too of how an economy actually works.
Absolutely. And even for me, I've kind of had to go back and say, okay, I want to study economy a little bit more and really understand the dynamics that are going on here. Another thing, ladies, that I think we don't realize the boat that we're in yet, because the dominoes haven't fallen for us to see. A food shortage is coming. Hyperinflation is coming. It's not here yet. And I think if it was here, people would wake up and see it. But life is going on pretty normally for some people, because some people still are able to work. But as this goes on, and even if we stop it now, those repercussions are still coming. And it's gonna hurt when it happens. So I think that's why we're all here on this podcast trying to scream at everybody, wake up. We have to stop the madness.
And on the list of things to do, I think also we want to reiterate, I think we talked about this earlier, but support small business, support your local businesses, your friends, your neighbors, and what they're doing, because that is how we will all survive this and return to, some normalcy of life.
Yeah. Our county commissioner, that I told you, they wrote this letter to the governor. He was talking about even now the close contact, the salons aren't open yet. He said, but retail is, and a lot of these salons sell products. He said, go in and buy their products. Buy your shampoo from them instead of at Walmart right now. Just every little bit you can do helps. And I love that. I love it when we come together and try to help each other.
Right.
Yeah, being creative with your resources for sure.
Well, and for those who are believers, I've been constantly reminded of what Jesus said when he said, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves, be wise as snakes, but innocent as doves. So this is such a balance, and there's no absolutes in this. It's all a balance and figuring out what works for us as individuals, as families, as communities, as states, and then hopefully as a nation.
Thank you so much, Becky, for joining us. Listeners, we sure hope that this episode has been informative. To stay engaged, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We would also be very grateful if you would consider giving us a positive review and rating. It really does help us continue to do what we do. Until next time, from your house to the State House to the White House, this is Engage with Eagle Forum.